Oh, that goes down as the darkest day in the club's history. I'll never forget that day. It was brutal. It was a brutal day. I remember being on annual leave, going into the club to hopefully celebrate the decision. It just turned to anger. We had to get off our backsides and find some players.
Hi everyone, my name's Julian Trantino and I'm from the Dons digital team. While we wait for footy to return, we're pleased to bring you a podcast series with Adrian Dodoro, the club's GM of Liston Recruiting. Leading the club's recruiting for 22 years, Adrian has a wealth of draft and trade stories that he'll be sharing exclusively on the podcast. We hope you enjoy it. Well, great to be joined again by Adrian Dodoro for another episode of Dodcast. Adrian, how are things?
Good, Jules. How are you?
Going all right. Hopefully looking forward to a return to footy pretty soon.
Yep.
As I'm sure you are.
Yeah, I can't wait. Be great to see the red and black back out there. Really looking forward to it.
Absolutely. Well, let's crack into it. This week we're talking about the 2016 top-up players following the suspensions handed to 34 past and present Bombers in light of the supplement saga. Of course, a significant period in Essendon's history and a year of unsung heroes, no one more notable than James Keller, who will join us later in the show. Before we get to all of that, let's take it back a year to when the provisional suspensions were handed out ahead of the 2015 NAB Challenge. Adrian, this was the first time you were forced to look at top-up players. What was the sentiment like at the time and how did you approach the situation?
Look, it was uncharted waters and it was certainly a frustrating period because we didn't know what the future was. And obviously there was we're in the paper for the wrong reasons. There was a lot of doom and gloom around the club. Our fans were under siege. Our club was under siege. And obviously the boys were going through an appeals process with the AFL. And we didn't know whether they were going to be able to play in 215. So the AFL put some rules in place and they allowed us to sign 13 players for that NAB series. So it was amazing. The boys were training away from Windy Hill. They were training at St Bernard's and at other locations, but they weren't allowed to train at Essendon at all. So we then thought, well, if these boys aren't available in 215, we'd been through a draft process. There were actually some restrictions on the types of players that we could bring in. They had to be previously listed or Essendon VFL players. So a lot of the quality players that were left over from the draft were eliminated. So then we sat down as a group and thought, well, what are the types of qualities that we want to bring into the club? And we identified boys that were physically strong enough to play. Fortunately, we didn't need them that year, but they had to play some of the NAB Cup games that particular season. So we identified 13 players, and they all signed up within a very, very short period of time. Marcus Marigliani, James Polkinghorne, Aaron Heppel, Josh Freezer, Anthony McDonald, Tip and Woody, Jordan Schroeder, Sam Tagliabue, Clint Jones, Mitch Brown, Mitch Clisby, Jared Petrenko, James Magnus. So, they all deserve a pat on the back for putting their hand up and relocating for a short period of time. And it just goes to show the dream of playing AFL football. Boys will do anything to play. And they certainly did that. And to their disappointment, it didn't go on. But we certainly got some wins out of it because we got to see, obviously, Tipper and Mitch Brown firsthand. They later came onto our senior list.
How agile did you and your team have to be during that period?
Look, Merv, Rob Forster Knight and the team, we actually knocked it over pretty quick because we knew what was available. We targeted the players that were playing at a very high level at state league level. We knew we weren't going to get a Brownlow medalist out of it, although, as I said, Tipper's going to be a great player for our club for many years to come, and Mitch Brown certainly served our club exceptionally well. But they all could have stood up and played at the level had it have been a requirement. There's no doubt. But it's probably one of the boys out of that whole group that, if I'm being honest, I'd have to say I'm probably disappointed that we never got to see Aaron Heppel play a senior game of league footy. He's just one of those great club servants, despite the fact, this has got nothing to do with the fact that he's a brother of Dyson. He just, one of those guys that you're probably going to be thinking, should he have been given the chance at some point? And he fronts up every week. A great VFL captain. We saw him last year in that VFL final against Richmond. I certainly was thinking, boy, does this boy deserve an opportunity? So,
Is he still on your radar, perhaps?
oh, look, everyone is. You never say never. Obviously, at the moment, we've got uncertain times ahead with list numbers and spots and what have you. So it'll certainly make it a lot tougher. But that whole process got us to see a number of boys firsthand in our training environment, and they all did themselves very proud.
Well, later on in that year, the 2015 draft rolled along, and there was a lot of good news around Essendon at the time. It was the club's best draft hand since '98, so 4 picks inside the top 30. There were no more penalties hanging over the club from the supplement saga, and it was, of course, the first one for John Worsfold at the club. How significant was it for you at the time?
Oh, huge. Drafting is the lifeblood of any footy club. So to get 2 top 10 draft picks was critical for us. And certainly there's been some really good players that have come out of that draft. But, we're really delighted that we were able to get, Darcy Parish and Aaron Francis, 2 players that are now starting to come through for us. And I think they're coming through really strongly. And as I said, they're the cornerstone of what makes your football club strong in the years ahead. You can never underestimate what first-round draft picks do for a football club. If you look at the history of all premiership teams, there's an underlining factor, and that's the quality that comes from early draft picks. And I don't care which premiership team you look at. The great Hawthorn teams, when they were able to get Roughhead and Franklin in one draft. Collingwood got Pendlebury and Thomas, as priority selections in draft. And they go on to formulate, real strength, cohesiveness, quality comes to the fore all the time. So, for us, it was critically important, but excitingly, they're 2 boys that are now coming into their best footy.
Were they ones that you had targeted early on? Did you feel you got what you were after with pick 5 and 6? Because we do know that top 10 was just loaded with talent.
Yeah, interesting. It was interesting. It was loaded with talent. If truth be known, I think Clayton Oliver was a player that we had targeted, and Goody at Melbourne slipped in and got him just beforehand. So he was one that we probably felt, from a needs perspective, we missed out on. But then you're sitting there and you go, well, you've got a kid like Darcy Parish who's been All-Australian at 17 years of age and 18 years of age. Probably not as physically as big as what Clayton was at the time, but you can just see that he's starting now to grow with confidence. And he's a classic kid that will always find the ball, and he'll be suited by the modern game because he'll go contest to contest. So, he's going to be a terrific player for us, and we're rapt to get Darcy, and we're equally rapt to secure Aaron, because Aaron could quite easily that year have gone number 1 in the draft. Unfortunately, there were some personal situations that didn't allow him to finish that season off. But he had a game at SANFL level, at state level, where he got a standing ovation. And I've said it before, I've never seen a kid get a standing ovation coming off the ground late in a game of football. He just absolutely dominated. He took about 14 or 15 marks. And then the following week, he went and played as a forward. All the recruiters asked the South Australians if they could play him forward, and he kicked about 5 goals, 6. And then his season came to an end, so we never really got to see him play the back half of that season. But we were always super keen to get Aaron and Darcy to our club, and we're rapt to have them.
You've had some recent success with South Australians, and Mason Redman was another one that was taken at pick 30. When did he come on your radar, and are you pleased to see just his rise lately and how he's really taken on that role across halfback?
Yeah, certainly. And Merv Kane and Bruce Evans just loved him from the first time they laid eyes on him, and they were strong all year about Mason. The days that I actually saw him play, he didn't actually do a lot. So I kept challenging the boys quite a bit about, does he find the ball? His numbers were pretty low. He did play, I think, 1 game of SANFL senior footy. But then when we put the whole picture together in terms of, where he'd come from, where he travelled from, relocating, all that sort of thing, and then you meet him and you realise that, he's a fairly complete package. You can play half back, half forward, on ball, and he's a tough, resilient kid.
The media talked him up as a forward as a time, Mason Redman. Was the plan to always play him in defence?
No, we actually thought he'd make, and still do think he could play as a midfielder. He's combative, he's tough, got good tank, got good speed, got good game awareness. And we've always felt it could be that tallish midfielder, but, a bit like Corey Enright was for the Cats, those really nice size 6'2" running mids. And I still think he could do that. Obviously, we've got a bit of depth in our back half with Sard and McKenna. Guelphy can play back half. So maybe going forward, he may get looked at, but he certainly looks really comfortable across half back. He actually, in his first year, played one game against Collingwood in his first year as a deep forward, and he was really, really good that day. He has actually kicked a few goals, hit the scoreboard. So, look, he's one of those all-round players, but you're right. You want to see these guys become a specialist of something, and I think it'll be half-back on ball for him.
Well, after Redmond, you put in a bid at pick 53 for Jack Silvani, which took the headlines at the time. Was that a bit of cheekiness from your end, or were you actually quite serious on getting him to the club?
You have to keep the opposition honest, particularly Carlton. They thought they were going to walk Jack through and get him for nothing. You've seen Jack's played 70 games of AFL football, so he's no mug. He can play the game. In fact, he's going to have a very good AFL career. So I knew he was sitting there, and I knew Carlton thought they were going to get him for nothing, and I knew they were going to take him. And I just thought, well, let's just keep him honest and they can use some points at that time. So, but had they declined, we'd have been more than happy to have had him, and it would have been justified.
Well, the pick later, you took Mitch Brown, who played a few seasons after that, and some would say was pretty unlucky to not be offered a new contract at the end of 2019. What was the reasoning behind that?
Well, firstly, Mitch was a terrific servant for our club, and it was a very, very tough decision not to offer him a contract last year. But we looked at our list and we had to make a tough call. We looked at the age demographics of our forwards, and we knew that we had to bring on a young, tall forward for the future of the club. And we targeted Harry Jones, and thankfully in the draft we got him. And to bring boys on the list, as I said in last week's podcast about Michael Hartley, we had to let Michael Hartley go to give Brandon Zerk-Thatcher the opportunity. And it's basically the same thing with Mitch Brown. You have to let someone go to bring someone on. And we knew that hopefully, Joey's coming back, James Stewart's coming back, McKernan's playing really good football as a forward. And we really wanted to bring in a young forward for the future of the club. So we needed the spot, identified Harry Jones, and we worked really hard in the draft to obviously gave up a fair bit to trade up to get him. So the strategy worked, but we had some hairy moments there because there weren't many tall forwards coming through in the draft. So that was basically the reason. Unfortunately, you've got limitations, and going forward, it's going to be a lot tougher, Jules, because the AFL are now talking about limiting the size of lists. And this will be the challenge for all clubs about how you balance your list. Certainly, if you're taking a short-term view, then there's no doubt that Mitch would have probably played a couple of games he probably would have played senior football for us this year. But if you're taking a long-term view, and you think that James Stewart, Joey Danaher, McKernan, hopefully Draper can play a bit forward, we thought we had a lot of options, and it gave us the chance to bring in a young kid who we desperately wanted to bring onto our program. So that was the reason, and it was a tough call, and he's desperately unlucky.
Your job requires you to make some pretty tough calls. How hard is it to have those conversations with players?
Extremely hard when it's people like Mitch Brown, who are is a fantastic person. And I'll be honest, sometimes it's really difficult to have those chats, and because there is a human element to this. You're dealing with people, and every club will say the same thing. They come to the club, they give it their all, but there's only a short lifespan for an AFL footballer. It's a cycle of life. You're drafted at 18. Most guys are out of the system by 22, 23, and then there's another percentage that get to about 30 years of age that have a career. In Mitch's case, he's blessed to have had a long career in the game, and he's also blessed that he's been given opportunity by the Melbourne Football Club. But they are tough, and they're conversations that you don't like having, particularly with guys like Mitch who do everything right and are certainly, stiff to be let go. Then you've got the other end of the spectrum where you've got young boys that, and every club has these kids that get drafted every year that don't give themselves the opportunity, and you see wasted talent walk out the door, and they're equally as tough because you want to see young people develop and get the best out of their lives. So, but it's a great industry, and the great thing about our game is that we give a lot of people opportunities to hop on senior list, and I really, really hope that for the integrity of the AFL going forward that we can keep our lists as long as possible to keep giving young men the opportunity to play the game.
Well, yeah, speaking of opportunities, there are plenty of them, especially through the VFL. And we saw Anthony McDonald, Tip and Woody arrive via the rookie draft that followed that 2015 draft. How did he not get picked up earlier by Essendon or any other club? I mean, he just hit the ground running in his first year, didn't he, in 2016?
Yeah, he certainly did. And Tipper showed exciting moments as a young player, but they were few and far between. I think he was only averaging 7 or 8 possessions a game, but what he did was electrifying. What let Tipper down was his body shape. You would look at him and you would think he was, probably carrying a few extra kilos, and there would be question marks around whether he would do the work. The one thing that stood out for Merv and I was that Peter Francis at Gippsland Power and Nick Stevens, who actually coached him, were super strong on him. And we had a really good relationship with both those guys and still do today. And they just kept saying, this guy could be a real lethal weapon. And they set off half back at the time. And so what we did after he left Gippsland Power, we invited him to come down to our VFL program, and the club supported our decision by giving him a job at the club. And we just set him some challenges about getting fit and getting his body in shape. And it took him a couple of years to do that, but boy, he hasn't looked back. And he set himself some really high standards in terms of the way he goes about his training program now. He's a real pro. And you would think, how the hell could this kid not have got drafted when you look at him now? But again, it comes down to each individual player's pathway and what they're up against in terms of the talent pool at the time. So obviously when you measured all the kids in the talent pool in that year, there were kids that were fitter, bigger, stronger, faster, and were getting more of the ball, and they had to just come through a different pathway. But these are the great stories. These are stories about kids with absolute resilience, and that's what Tipper's got. Now, I really love these stories. We've spoken about Pev and other boys that have come through VFL programs, but it's these guys that got the want and the desire to make it. He's a kid from Tiwi that relocated at about 14 or 15 years of age to Gippsland, and he's done an amazing job. We're really proud of Tipper.
He's been an absolutely brilliant story, and we love seeing him play. So the vibe was pretty good around that time after 2015, and then all of a sudden you get thrown a significant curveball, a really dark day in the club's history. January 12, 2016, a WADA appeal shows that the players will be banned for the 2016 season, 34 in total, 12 from the current list. How did you take that at the time? Was it a shock? How did you approach it?
Oh, that goes down as the darkest day in the club's history. I'll never forget that day. I've never seen grown men cry so much. I've never seen despair, heartache in a football club. We were so confident that the decision was going to go our way. It went our way 12 months earlier, and then there was the appeal, and it was brutal. It was a brutal day, and I remember being on annual leave, going into the club to hopefully celebrate the decision, and it just turned to anger, and we had to get off our backsides and find some players, and that was the focus, and we had to stay really, really focused. I think I had my mental breakdown after we signed the last player, because we had to be focused on getting a team on the park for that year, but that's what's made us stronger now, made us a better club, and that's why we've got the best supporters in the AFL. And you can never question Essendon people. They are sensational supporters. Our coteries and networks, everyone's stuck behind us. And that's why, a period like this at the moment, Jules, where everyone's looking at society and, things are looking a little bit bleak. I think we're one club that hopefully the resilience of the Asada saga will make us stronger at the moment, coming out of COVID-19. So, yeah, it was dark times, definitely dark times.
Personally, how did you keep it together during that time? You were given 2 months to try and find 10 players to fill the list for 2016.
I I remember just saying to myself, keep it together and get on with it. And I think we knocked it over really quick. We got the 10 boys signed up really quick. We're speaking to James Kelly in the podcast, and to get people like him in the door, and Stokesy and Crowley and the rest of the guys was fantastic. It ended up being a great year for the club. We learnt a lot about ourselves as people, and we've also, we've mentioned time and time again what a great job Woosha did that year with his coaching staff, and the entire football club need to be commended for it. But look, it was tough. It was tough going, and we're glad it's over, and we're never going back there ever again.
Well, you mentioned James Kelly, who will join us shortly. He was one of 10. So they were Ryan Crowley, Mark Jamar, Matthew Stokes, Matt D, James Polkinghorne, Nathan Grimmer, Jonathan Simpkin, Sam Grimley, and Sam Michael. Were there any stories or any approaches out of those that really stood out for you?
Well, the Kelly Stokes one was the interesting one, and we'll speak about that with Cal fairly soon. Just the methodical approach and the professionalism that Cal had, and the enthusiasm and just the want and desire from Stokesy to get out there and play again. A lot of these guys just wanted to play. Mark Jamar, for example, is now our rucks coach at the club. He let go by Melbourne, and he jumped at the chance to be our ruckman that particular year with Matty Leuenberger. So, there's a heap of stories, and you meet some wonderful people through processes like this. The great thing about all those boys were they dropped everything to get their next chance to keep playing footy. And that would always stand out for me. Stories. Sammy Michael was an interesting one. I've never seen a bloke eat so much in all my life. One of the nicest guys you'd ever wish to meet. But he would have broken records for the amount of food consumption I've ever seen in my whole entire life. And he was that meticulous with his food, an absolute cracking bloke. He was one that probably a favourite of that group for sure.
Did they need much convincing? How did you pitch the club to them in what was a pretty turbulent time?
They didn't need much convincing at all, to be honest. Again, it gets back to the point where, these guys are competitive beasts. You look at a guy like Ryan Crowley, who he just wanted to play. He wanted to get out there, and we thought with Crowls that, we're going to be very, very young. Cal was going to give us some experience down back. Obviously, Brendan Goddard had got to the club as well, so we had a little bit of experience, but around the ball, we're going to be a bit light. So we got Crowls to come on board to be that junkyard dog tagger for us. We spoke about Cal, spoke about Stokesy. We found Matty D from the process. I think people forget that. We signed Matty D up, who'd had played some terrific games at Richmond, but was let go, and then he jumped at the chance. He just couldn't believe he got the opportunity. Subsequently, he got retained on our list. James Polkinghorne was a bloke that, obviously a former Brisbane player, a local. He was great and actually did a bit of work in our welfare department. Jonathan Simpkin was going well until he hurt himself. Spoke about Mark Jamar, who's still around the club. Just a great bloke, Rush. Big smile, a really giving sort of a person, and taught our younger guys a hell of a lot, and still doing so today. And we signed Sam Grimley, because there was just a lack of tools at the time, and we wanted to get someone to give a young Joe Danaher a chop out at the time, and he came on board. But it was an interesting time, but we found a lot of players through that period. Fantasia had to step up, Parrish had to step up, Joey had to step up, and it held us in good stead for the future.
How much do you think it's helped their development? You mentioned Parrish and Fantasia.
Hard to quantify, because maybe they would have been better players with a stronger team around them. I think though, but any opportunity that you're given to play league football is an opportunity to show what you can do. And what it shows is your mental resilience and your mental toughness. And that's what stood out with Tipper, with Parrish, and Fantasia was one that stood up, because we thought that Raz probably needed a bit more time because of his body shape, very light-bodied player, but he just thrived on responsibility. And that's where you see people grow in your environment, that they say, there's an opportunity here for me. and I'm going to take it. And that's what they certainly did.
If you didn't have to spend these, January and February of 2016 looking for 10 top-up players, how would you have normally spent those months at that time of the year?
Yeah, well, it's a time of year where I'd probably be on annual leave, which I was, and I'd be coming back to work at about first or second week of February. And then obviously hopping into a fair bit of planning, and games come around as early as February. Obviously practice matches around the country and what have you. So and all the planning starts with contracting, TPP strategy, list management strategy, future drafting, all that sort of thing comes into play. So that's what I normally would have been doing, but that particular year was about finding a whole host of players to fill a void.
Well, we've got James Kelly on the line, who was the real success story out of those 2016 top-up players. After retiring from AFL footy, he returned to play 2 seasons in the red and black, finishing a runner-up in the 2016 Crichton Medal, and now an assistant coach at the club. Adrian, could you have predicted Cal's contribution being so significant?
Cal's a champion of the game. It's actually interesting sitting back during this period and watching all these old, Geelong finals. It's amazing what a champion player he was, and you tend to forget it. So there's no real hidden secret that, once he got to our club, he was going to be an ultra pro. His body was in good shape, and he probably could have kept playing for another year or so.
Cal, how are you?
Good, thanks. How are you?
I'm good, thanks. Cal, at the end of 2015, you retired from AFL footy after 3 premierships with Geelong and quickly moved into a football operations role before the shot call from Essendon. Was a return to playing ever in the back of your mind?
Not really. I felt like I finished in 2015 and I still had some footy left in the tank, but I'd put that to bed because there was no avenue to come back and play AFL. And I was happy to move on and start a new career working at the head office, and I'd thought eventually might come back to clubland and be a coach. But in my mind, that was a few years down the track.
Cal, how are you? It's Adrian.
Good, thank you, my friend. How are you?
Going well. Now, come on, tell the truth. What got you over the line and got you out of retirement to come and play with the Bombers? Tell the truth.
Are you suggesting that it was you?
No, I'm not saying it was me, but we just want to get the facts here. We want to give our fans out there the facts.
No, look,
facts.
Like I said, I'd finished in 2015, and I'd felt like I still could play good footy. I felt like my body was good, and I'd had 5 months off. And when the boys got suspended, I got a phone call from Matt Egan, within sort of an hour or so. He was a coach at the time and my best mate from school. And he'd sort of said, was there any interest from me to come and play? And I said, look, I haven't given it any thought. But in the back of my mind, I'd already sort of thought I could do this if I needed to, if this is something they wanted me to do and I had an opportunity to help out the club that I supported as a kid, I would take that opportunity. And I'd made up my mind really quickly off the back of that phone call with Matt Egan. And then when I say made up my mind, I hadn't actually made up my mind, but I thought if it comes down to it, push comes to shove.
It's just good that the truth is finally coming out. That's all. Keep going.
Anyway, so, long story short, the phone call from Adrian followed the next day, and that was a lovely phone call. And then we had a meeting and with Matthew Stokes as well, and sort of the rest is history, as they say. But at the time, I had the feeling that I wanted to actually help more than anything. I thought if I could play some good footy, that would be great. I never sort of thought I'd play as many games as I did, but I wanted to help and be someone who could give everyone a chop out in a time where the club I supported as a kid was having a really rough period.
Yeah, well, spot on. But I think our fans out there probably need to see a truer perspective of what actually happened, because here you had the great James Kelly and his mate Stokesy working at the AFL. So he got these guys that had played football for 12, 13 years, and all of a sudden they're working a 9 to 5 job. So I called Tom Petroro, their manager, and we organised a bit of a meeting, and we did catch up. And the funny thing about the catch up was that I had an inkling that they both wanted to play, but Cal came into the meeting as the negotiator, playing hard to get, whereas Stokesy had this big grin on his face, and you could see written all over his face was, just give me the contract, I want to play. And Cal's just given him the odd elbow in the guts to shut up, I'll do the talking. So the conversation, they did, and the conversation went a bit like this. So I'm saying, boys, we'd really like you to play, would you consider it? Stokesy sitting there with the biggest grin on his face going, get me out of the office, I want to get back into footy. Cal turns around and says, well, look, I'm not too sure. And you've just heard him say he'd made up his mind within 5 minutes. But to me, he said, look, I'm not too sure. I live in Geelong. Do I have to do weights training? What?
No.
We can modify that.
No.
Hang on. Oh, hang on. What about these school appearances? Do I have to go to them? Well, I live in Geelong. What about my recovery sessions? And to be honest, Jules, we never had much of a bargaining power back then. So Stokesy sitting there with a big grin on his face.
You're making it sound not what it was, Adrian. I'd said that. I didn't want to not do weights. I said, could I do weights early so I could get home to my young family? And you're right, I didn't want to do appearances. I felt like I'd done a lot of appearances in my time, and I wasn't coming out of retirement to be doing appearances. But in the end, I ended up doing because I felt guilty for all the players who did. But we were just sort of, I guess from my point of view, we were just feeling out what it would be. Like we would be coming back, and it would be, it was more sort of what the club was thinking about what the year was going to be, whether it was going to be pick up where they left off the year before, or whether it was going to be, let's do what we can to get through the year and make it a fun environment, all those sort of things.
So, Cal, did you need much convincing at the time, or it's just a matter of, getting those finer details sorted?
It was a little bit of finer detail, and I knew, like I said before, I knew I could do it. I felt like I could, and I'd had some time off, and a few little niggles I'd had late in my career were gone. And I'd actually started training again, so I felt pretty good when I was training, just on a personal level for myself, and. So I think just actually sitting down with Adrian, and also the next day, or it might have been a couple of days later, I had a phone call with Woosher as well, and we're just chatting, and I sort of said the same sorts of things, and he was a bit the same, and which was good for me because I felt like Woosher and Adrian were on the same page about what the year was going to look like. They didn't come in and say they were going to win the premiership. They didn't come in and say this is going to be diabolical. It was both of them were talking about how they wanted to have some senior players around and create an environment for the young players that were left behind. They still wanted to continue to develop young players, and that was going to be my role within coming back to play, was to help the younger players and, just be an older person in a really young environment.
Yeah, and I was only, there's always the humorous side to all these negotiations and meetings, but seriously speaking, what it said about Cal was that he was methodical, professional, considered, just everything you'd want to have. And the more I spoke to him on that day, the more I said, we've got to get this guy into the club. We desperately need to get James Kelly to our football club. And for our Essendon supporters out there, he showed unbelievable leadership in that particular year. We then consequently re-signed him the following year, made the finals, and we went out, unfortunately, against the Swans up in Sydney, but the club did not hesitate to give Cal an opportunity to be a coach at our football club, and he's doing an amazing job, and he has a great future in coaching. And that's one of the benefits of what happened through that Asada period, is that there were a lot of lowlights, there was a lot of disappointment, but out of it we got a number of players that went on to forge AFL careers, and he's a budding coach within our ranks. Cal, my question to you is, you've been a premiership player, great environment at Geelong. All of a sudden you've come to this club and the expectation was we weren't going to win a game. How did you handle that, and what were your thoughts on how the season went?
I think it was actually easier than what some people may think because the expectation was low. Like I'd said, you and Woosh had talked to me about the opportunity for development of young players and the leadership of young players. So my mindset the whole time, from when I took the first phone call to when I played my first game, was I was there to help. Whatever I could do to help out the younger players. I really enjoyed that part of it, and I enjoyed that players would ask me questions, probe me about game plan, what we did at Geelong, what was this player like, what was that player like, how does Joel Selwood prepare himself, was Matthew Scarlett as ruthless as they say he was, things like that. And so my mindset was all around that and my ability to share my knowledge and develop the younger players rather than the win-loss. And it was quite an easy thing to do given the circumstances. But then, we started playing, I think, some different, pretty good footy. We started improving as the year went on, and it was really rewarding to see that rather than see the wins on the board.
Yeah, I've said it before. For me personally, even though we won the wooden spoon, it was probably the most enjoyable year we've ever had in football, given that there was no expectations. I know you've won premierships, big finals, big games, but I've always wanted to ask you, the win against Melbourne, when everyone said, I think it was round 2 or 3 that particular year, everyone said we wouldn't win a game for the year. How does that win rank up there in your career for highlights?
Oh, it was great. Seeing the boys' faces at the end of that game, they were ecstatic. Darcy Parish kicked that goal to sort of seal it, and there was things like that happened throughout that game. And I remember talking to Zaka after the game, and he was sort of saying, you've had bigger wins than this. This would mean nothing to you. And I was like, no, mate, it's every win's as important as the other ones. And to see the players, their excitement after the game, I got real satisfaction out of. And selfishly, I felt like I'd played a role in that. But it was really enjoyable. Any win is a good win. It was fantastic.
Adrian, I wanted to just go back to where it all began with Cal. The 2001 Super Draft, you had pick 18 and you wanted to take James at that pick, but you missed out. He went to the Cats at pick 17. Can you talk us through that experience?
Oh, yeah, just another one of the hard luck stories. Actually, and Cal would probably remember this, but we thought that he was going to get through to our pick 18, and hadn't spoken to him prior to the draft because we just wanted to keep expectations fairly low about who we wanted to pick. And I remember speaking to Harves, who was in the next office down. I said, hey, Harves, I'm going to go ring up this kid, Kelly, from Calder Cannons. He lives up the road at Woodend? Sunbury, same thing. No, sorry, apologies. Sunbury. And so I rang him up, and Harves actually listened to the conversation, and Cal's gone, I'm an Essendon supporter, and, the 93 premiership and all that sort of stuff. I could hear Harves saying, just get him. So we actually told him that if things fell our way, we're going to draft him, but we missed out by one. So, but we got him, some 10, 11 years later. Would have been nice to have had him through that the mid-2000s, no doubt.
Cal, how do you think that Essendon reignited your passion for the game?
Oh, it was more so the helping of the younger players. Look at watching the development in Zach Merritt, Fantasia, Tip and Woody, Darcy Parish, those sort of guys, and how much I enjoyed watching them develop and watching them learn and watching them work hard and not knowing what hard work looked like. And then, a year later, watching them work hard independently without getting prodded. Things like that was what I became, really in love with about footy again. I'd understood that my best playing days were behind me, but I got real satisfaction out of that leadership and development of the younger players, and that's what sent me down the road to coach. I thought that through a period of my career, I thought that I would coach, and then for sort of the back end of my career, I thought maybe I'll go to it after I do something else. And it was really especially the first 12 months at Essendon that I really enjoyed my time, and I enjoyed working and watching the young players. And I thought, this is what I want to do. And I had a conversation with my wife about it. I just said to her, I think I want to coach. How do you feel about that? It means that I'll be on contracts again, and we're having a family and all that sort of stuff. And she was great. So she said, I was wondering when this conversation was going to happen. I knew that you were going to go down this road anyway, so let's do it. And then I waited 12 months before I said anything to the club. And then when it was looking like things were going to finish up and we weren't sure what was going on, I sort of said, I need to know because I want to be a coach. And funny enough, some spots had opened up at Essendon, and I sort of went through a formal interview process, but it was really that 12 months of working with the younger players and developing and watching them, start their careers that sort of turned it around.
Cal, when you joined Essendon, you tweeted Don the Sash before the news was official. I don't think you'd even signed the contract yet. Were you struggling to contain your excitement at the time?
No, I wanted to control it. I met with Adrian, went to the club, had a quick medical, and I'd sort of wandered around a little bit and said g'day, and then I left. I drove out of the club and I parked on Melrose Drive, and I rang my dad and I said, he's like, what are you going to do? And I said, I think I'm going to do it. Not I think, I am. I'm going to do it. I'm just leaving now. And he was wrapped. He's a lifelong Essendon supporter as well. And so he was pumped. So I was sitting on Melrose Drive and I wrote a text message to the senior players who I used to play with. I just sent him a message and say, boys, some news is going to come out soon. I'm going to start playing for Essendon. I hope you all understand the reasons why. And I sent a bit of a personal message to some guys I was really close with. And then I thought there was some media. I think it was Tom Brown was sniffing around the footy club, and I thought he saw me in my car. I got a staff member to drive me in their car from out the back of the footy club to my car so no one would see me. So the tweet was about just controlling the information myself. I didn't want to turn on the news and then see that someone had got a photo for me or stopped me in the car park. So I tried to control that whole thing and then tweet, Don the Sash. And my manager rang me and he's like, we haven't even talked about money or we haven't signed a contract yet, But I said, well, if I don't end up playing there, I'm going to end up working there because of this now. So, yeah.
Very good.
Good tactic. The influence of Woosha, how much has that been on your coaching career now at Essendon, and also how much of an influence was he when you were contemplating joining Essendon?
I think the main thing I've learned from Woosha is his ability to stay calm when everyone else isn't. There's times throughout my career, and especially early as a young coach, where you do tend to get emotional, and sometimes Woosha gets a bit of stick for being unemotional, but that's actually a great strength, and it's what you want the leader of your organisation to be, is cool and calm in hard situations. And throughout that 2016 year, I don't think I heard Woosha raise his voice once to that group of players. He didn't ever call people out in meetings. He made people feel comfortable. Everyone was willing to put their hand up and talk in a meeting. All those sorts of things are really great fundamentals that Woosha's taught me as a young coach, and what I watched him do as a player. His ability to calm the room, always talk with the same tone in his voice, have an ability to get the answers out of the group rather than give the answers to the group is the main thing I've learned from Woosh.
Yeah, he was outstanding in that first year. Like, he's been a great asset to us as well, and we thank him for everything he's done. But I couldn't believe the contribution to keep the environment bubbling along. And as I've said before, the boys wanted that year to keep going. Here we were finished on the bottom of the ladder, but everyone had enthusiasm to keep going towards the latter part of the year. I think we won 2 of the last 3, didn't we, Cal?
Yeah, we did well. Like I said before, I thought we improved at the back end of the year. And, Woosh's ability to stay calm and unemotional in those things allowed the playing group just to focus on footy and play. We weren't going into meetings wondering whether Woosha was going to give us a bake.
Cal, on the podcast here, the Dodcast, actually, we asked the hard-hitting questions, mate. Do you want to be a senior AFL coach one day? We're looking for headlines tomorrow in the
hard-hitting
Herald Sun.
journalism. Is that you?
Yeah, we're hard hitting here. We're very hard hitting.
Yeah. Look, like I'd be lying if it said it wasn't something I thought about, but at this point in time, I've only been coaching for a couple of years, and I coach every day to try to be a better coach and get the most out of my players. And if eventually one day my skill set allows me to do something like that, then that's great. I'm not closing the door on that ever. But at this point in time, it's like being a young player. You're just trying to learn the game, learn how to coach, build new skills, put more tools in your toolbox so you can eventually do something like that. So the door's not closed ever on that, but I do feel like I'm still learning a lot as a young coach.
Yeah. So in other words, you've just said that you want to be a senior coach one day. That's what the answer is.
Adrian, this is ambush journalism. This isn't hard-hitting journalism.
Ambush. Oh, we're looking for more viewers down the track. That's all. Cal, tell me about the future of the team going forward. You know, you're intimately, obviously involved with the playing group at the moment. Where do you see the future? How do you see it? What can we achieve going forward as our senior coach at Essendon? A senior assistant coach at Essendon.
Yeah, nice one. Look, I think with any playing group, where you end up really is up to the group. Where how far they're willing to go is up to them, of how hard they're willing to work, how tight they're willing to be, how connected they are with each other, how aligned they are with the coaches. I think certainly if you're talking from a recruiting talent point of view, we've got enough cattle to do what we want to do. It's a matter of getting everyone on the same page, embedding things we need to embed. I think a lot of the time you look at teams like Richmond and you think, oh, wow, they came out of nowhere and they dominated this grand final in 2016 against a team that, were tipped to beat them. But the work that Richmond had done takes a long period of time. They weren't a very good team for a fair while. And to get these things ingrained and embedded and to get your playing list where you want it to be does take time. So our focus is on improvement, continue to get better, get games into players we need to get games in, manage our senior players as best we can to have them performing at the right end of the year. All those sorts of things is the focus. And it sounds so repetitive to hear people from clubs say that, but it's the reality of it, where the hard part is we're a results-based industry. And the challenge of coaching and being in an AFL club is to ignore the results and stick with the process. And I think we're on that path, which is really good. It's really comforting. I've seen it before, and there's other coaches in the organisation that have seen it before. Yourself, Adrian, have been there since the war. You've seen it, so you can feel the swell coming up underneath the group. But it's up to us to how far we go forward with it.
Yeah, no, well said. Obviously, 17 was your last year of football. Did you have another one in you? Did you think you had one more in the tank?
Yeah, I certainly thought physically I was fine. Physically, I thought I could go again. Mentally, I had some questions about whether I was as committed as you need to be an AFL player. I'd felt like if I looked after myself over the break, I could play another year. But now, sitting here in 2020, I feel good that I'd finished playing, thinking, oh, maybe I could have, rather than being completely tapped out. I left the game in a really good mindset. I was enormously grateful for two great clubs that I got to play with. I had so much experience with 2016, 2017, my time at Geelong, all of those things. I felt like I was just really comfortable with finishing. And I knew what I wanted to do, whether I was a coach straight away or whether I ended up coaching a few years down the track. I was really comfortable in my life and in myself that I'd achieved everything I wanted to, and I was ready to move on.
Well said. And, you've been an absolute asset to our football department moving forward. And, we got you late, mate, but geez, you've made a significant contribution in a short period of time.
Thanks, mate. I appreciate that. It's been good. I really enjoy the footy club.
Well, Cal, it's been great to have you on the show and get some fascinating insights into how you joined Essendon and also the coaching role you have now at the club. Hope you keep well during the lockdown and hopefully we'll resume soon when the some announcements come in the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, let's hope so. Hope everyone's well, and thank you for having me on.
Yeah. Coffee soon, Cal.
Love that.
Well, that's all for this week's show. Thanks for listening. Adrian, we'll have some questions for you next week from the Essendon faithful, so stay tuned on how you can get involved. As always, pleasure to catch up with you.
Thanks, Jules. Looking forward to next week.